Elena Rodriguez stepped off the transport van into a wall of dry desert air and silence so absolute it swallowed the sound of her boots. The entrance to Iron Ridge Flight Academy stood behind a gate of reinforced steel, framed by perimeter towers, and concrete walls that shimmered faintly in the heat. She adjusted the strap on her duffel and moved forward without hesitation, her gray maintenance uniform clinging to her in the sun. But Elena carried a secret that would soon turn this elite academy upside down. The uniform bore no patches, no rank, no nameplate, just standard civilian issue. She carried no orders in hand, only a digital authorization embedded in her ID chip, which the scanner at the gate read with a reluctant beep. What the scanner couldn't read was the classified military clearance hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic misfiling, a deliberate error that someone in Joint Command had orchestrated. For reasons Elena was only beginning to understand, inside everything looked ordered and untouchable. Rows of sleek simulator hangars, personnel in pressed flight suits moving with practiced speed, and command officers whose glances swept past her as if she were part of the equipment. A tall man in a pilot instructor vest passed her near the intake office and barked, "Civilian maintenance drop-off is down the hall. Tech support doesn't loiter near the flight rings." Elena nodded, said nothing, and moved on. She wasn't there to loiter. She was there to uncover something far more dangerous than anyone realized. The next morning, during the trainee briefing, she stood near the back wall of the flight operations bay, screens lit up with simulations of multi-engine descent control and lateral drift recovery, maneuvers she had performed in real combat zones while these cadets were still studying textbooks. Her hand rose once when the instructor asked about emergency cargo load shifting in asymmetric turbulence. She barely finished her sentence before the front row erupted in laughter. One cadet grinned and muttered, "She thinks she's here to teach pilots." The instructor gave her a hard look and continued without acknowledging her question. A few heads turned toward her, eyes narrowed, skeptical or amused. None of them suspected that Elena had been deliberately placed here to investigate rumors of training protocol violations that had allegedly led to 3 pilot deaths in the past year. Later that day, as she passed through the main simulator hallway, a cluster of cadets in navy blue suits blocked her path. At their center was Tyler Kane, whose name was whispered often with both envy and fear. He was the son of a decorated general, and carried himself with the dangerous confidence of someone who believed rules didn't apply to him. Without warning, he tipped the contents of his energy drink across her lap, bright orange liquid soaking into the front of her uniform. "You'll get used to cleaning up after real pilots," he said with a smirk that held something darker beneath it. Phones were out before she could step away, screens flickering as some captured her silence, waiting for an outburst that never came. She looked down at the spreading stain on her uniform and noticed something else. Tyler's flight badge was crooked, revealing the edge of something metallic underneath, a recording device. Her trained eye caught it instantly, but she made no move to react. Her expression didn't change. She walked past him, her posture level, but her mind was racing. Why was he recording their interactions? What was he planning to do with the footage? The laughter behind her followed, then faded. But Elena's investigation had just taken an unexpected turn. The hidden truth. By the end of the week, it was made official. Elena received an internal memo stating that due to her civilian maintenance classification, she would not be granted access to flight simulation systems. Instead, she was assigned to manage equipment documentation and assist with parts routing, exactly where she needed to be to access the Academy's most sensitive records. When she reported to the training hangar, the doors to the simulators remained locked to her ID. Instructors barely acknowledged her presence. During a training exercise review, she stood behind a tinted glass panel while cadets practiced storm descent protocols inside full-scale mock-ups. She watched closely, noting how one trainee overcorrected rudder trim and failed the exercise, the same mistake that had allegedly killed Lieutenant Morrison 6 months ago. No one asked her opinion, but Elena was building a case. At meals, she sat alone, her tray always neat, food mostly untouched. Conversations at the surrounding tables buzzed with coded arrogance and something else: fear. She began to piece together fragments of conversation that painted a disturbing picture. "Heard she's investigating the Morrison incident," someone whispered. "Maybe she's internal affairs," another voice added nervously. "Or maybe she's here to shut us down." Every comment landed within earshot, but none drew a response. In it, she documented more than just technical observations. She was mapping a network of corruption that reached higher than anyone suspected. Her uniform never changed. The same gray, same lack of insignia, same stain where the energy drink had dried. It became a symbol to them of what she wasn't. To her, it was perfect camouflage for what she really was, a decorated combat pilot and military investigator operating deep undercover. The more they overlooked her, the more she discovered. Every system, every personnel handoff, every shortcut used by cadets who assumed no one beneath their rank was watching. But Elena was always watching, always recording, always building her case against the Academy's deadly secret. One afternoon, as the cadets gathered for a tactical group photo in front of the base's central simulator dome, she was told to step aside. "We're capturing future pilots, not maintenance staff," Tyler said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. She stood just outside the frame, facing away from the camera, letting the desert wind tug her braid over one shoulder. But what Tyler didn't know was that Elena was positioning herself to photograph something far more important, the restricted flight manual he'd carelessly left on a nearby table containing evidence of the illegal training modifications that had killed 3 pilots. What she did do, quietly and with precision, was gather the proof that would soon expose everything. The investigation deepens. Elena's days began before sunrise and ended long after the tarmac cooled. She worked in apparent silence, moving from hangar to hangar with a portable scanner and clipboard in hand, but every scan was copying classified documents to an encrypted drive hidden in her equipment. The flight crews barely looked up when she passed, never suspecting that their maintenance tech was actually Lieutenant Colonel Elena Rodriguez, one of the military's most skilled pilots and investigators. The systems error that routed her to Iron Ridge was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated cover story. Someone in Joint Command had discovered evidence of a training scandal that was being covered up at the highest levels. Pilots were dying because of modified flight protocols designed to hide budget cuts and equipment failures. Elena had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment of her career: infiltrate the Academy and expose the truth. During simulator drills, she stood behind the observation glass, invisible but always recording. The pilots inside called out commands, toggled settings, and sometimes made fatal errors that instructors deliberately ignored. Elena documented everything in her encrypted notebook, not just technical data, but evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of command. The isolation was part of her cover, but it was also taking its toll. In the cafeteria, her tray was always the same: a plain protein pack, rehydrated greens, a metal bottle of water. She sat at the end of the longest table, the one no one else used, while fragments of conversation revealed more pieces of the puzzle. "Logistics, Lisa," someone whispered one day, not knowing they were talking about one of the military's most decorated pilots. Another time, "Pretty sure she's here to spy on us." They were more right than they knew. Elena never looked up, but she was memorizing every voice, every face, every admission of guilt. The food sat untouched half the time, but she stayed until the room cleared, then returned to her quarters to upload the day's intelligence to her encrypted files. Her bunk was at the far end of the unassigned wing, chosen specifically for its isolation. She had no roommate by design. The sheets were always taut, the locker perfectly organized, but hidden behind a false panel was military-grade communication equipment that connected her directly to Joint Command. A map of the Academy taped inside her door was marked with highlighter. Strokes, not just maintenance corridors, but security weak points, document storage locations, and surveillance blind spots. She wasn't there to belong. She was there to expose a conspiracy that was killing pilots and covering it up. The breakthrough discovery. On clear evenings after the base fell into hush, Elena walked the perimeter paths alone, but she wasn't just exercising. She was meeting her handler, a figure in the shadows who briefed her on developments in the wider investigation. The desert winds carried their whispered conversations away from any listening devices. The massive C-130 parked in the auxiliary bay had become central to her investigation. While the others barely noticed it, focused on their jets and simulators, Elena had discovered it was being used to transport evidence of the Academy's crimes to a disposal site in the desert. She had flown aircraft like it in combat zones these cadets couldn't imagine, but more importantly, she had identified it as the key to breaking the case wide open. The notebook grew thicker with each passing day. Its pages held more than technical figures. They contained proof of forged maintenance records, evidence of pilots being graduated despite failing critical safety tests, and most damning of all, communications between Academy leadership and defense contractors who were profiting from the cover-up. When Tyler Kane passed her in the maintenance tunnel one morning, he gave her a mocking salute and said, "Still fixing our equipment? Guess someone's got to keep the war machines running?" His words carried more weight than he realized. Elena had discovered that Tyler's father, General Kane, was at the center of the conspiracy, using his son's position at the Academy to monitor the investigation and eliminate anyone who got too close to the truth. She didn't respond to Tyler's taunt, just stepped aside and kept moving. But that night, she made a decision that would change everything. The evidence was almost complete, but she needed one final piece of proof, and she knew exactly where to find it. There were moments late at night when Elena sat near the edge of the tarmac and felt the weight of what she was about to expose. 3 pilots had died because of what was happening at Iron Ridge. How many more would die if she failed? To stop it? She sometimes reached into her pocket, touched the edge of the encrypted notebook, and thought about the families of the dead pilots who still didn't know the truth about what had happened to their sons and daughters. But Elena didn't just seek justice anymore. She was racing against time because her handler had warned her that the conspiracy was about to claim its next victim, and she was beginning to suspect that victim might be her. The deadly emergency. The emergency alarm began as a low-frequency pulse, but Elena recognized it immediately as something far more sinister than a routine training exercise. This was the signal she had been waiting for, the moment when the Academy's conspiracy would finally be exposed. Within 30 seconds, the alarm shifted into a full siren, flashing crimson light across every surface of Iron Ridge's logistics. Bay? Voices barked through comms, but Elena noticed something others missed. The panic in the commander's voices wasn't about the supposed emergency. It was about something else entirely. 2 military vehicles had been loaded into the rear. Elena's investigation had revealed they were actually mobile evidence destruction units designed to eliminate any trace of the Academy's crimes. The emergency mission was a cover story to transport the evidence to a remote location where it would be destroyed forever. The storm approaching from the east was real, but it was also perfect timing for the conspirators. Under cover of the weather, they could dispose of everything that connected them to the pilot deaths and the cover-up. Initially, the mood at the IE command post was tense but controlled. That changed when Elena realized the true scope of what was happening. The 2 assigned C-130 pilots, both potential witnesses to the conspiracy, hadn't been exposed to radiation by accident. They had been deliberately poisoned to prevent them from discovering what they were really being asked to transport. The room erupted in controlled chaos, but Elena saw through it all. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was the final phase of a cover-up that had been months in the making. "We've got 42 minutes!" the logistics chief shouted, following his script perfectly. 42 until that forward unit gets flanked without cover!" But Elena knew the truth. They had 42 minutes until the evidence destruction team reached the disposal site. Once that evidence was gone, the conspiracy would be buried forever, and more pilots would die. "What about backup pilots?" someone asked, playing their role. "They're en route from High Bay Air Command. Hours out," came the rehearsed reply. Elena watched the performance unfold, but she was already planning her next move. The conspirators had made one critical mistake. They had assumed their maintenance tech was just another civilian contractor. They had no idea that Lieutenant Colonel Elena Rodriguez was about to turn their own plan against them. When Tyler Kane was asked to pilot the mission, he shook his head with practiced reluctance. "With respect, sir, I've logged 13 hours in the sim with a clean load. Not with equipment this sensitive. That's beyond my certification." The other cadets exchanged glances but stayed silent, following the script perfectly. They weren't afraid of the weather. They were afraid of Elena discovering the truth, but Elena had already discovered it, and now she was going to act. The moment of truth. The red emergency lights continued to strobe across the operations center, but Elena saw them differently now, not as warnings of danger, but as signals that her investigation was about to reach its climax. She stood near a utility stack behind the main briefing table, invisible to the conspirators who were orchestrating their elaborate deception. She had arrived before the first siren sounded because her handler had warned her this moment was coming. The Academy's leadership had decided to destroy all evidence of their crimes, but they needed a pilot desperate enough to fly the mission without asking questions. They were about to get more than they bargained for. Elena stood with her arms folded, eyes scanning the live feed on the largest screen. But she wasn't looking at fuel flow rates or cargo balance warnings. She was memorizing every face in the room, documenting every person involved in the conspiracy. Her hidden camera was recording everything. The commander paced a circle near the center of the room, his performance flawless but meaningless. Elena had already intercepted communications, revealing that the forward unit under attack was actually a joint command investigation team that had gotten too close to the truth. The evidence destruction mission was meant to eliminate their case files before they could be analyzed. "If this flight doesn't go out, people will die," the commander declared, not realizing how true his words were, but not in the way he intended. And still no qualified pilot stepped forward exactly as planned. Tyler Kane stood near the door, his jaw tight with the strain of following orders his father had given him. His classmates shifted in place, all of them complicit in the deception. But none of them knew that their maintenance tech was actually the one person who could fly that mission, and the one person who knew exactly what they were really asking her to do. Elena watched it unfold with a stillness that concealed her growing determination. She could see the fracture lines forming between authority and truth, between lies and justice. The storm outside wasn't the only one building. 27 minutes remained on their countdown to destruction. But Elena had her own countdown running, to exposure, to justice, to the moment when the truth would finally come to light. Inside the room, silence settled like a held breath. Then someone said aloud what everyone was pretending to believe. "We've got no one left." Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice cutting through the manufactured tension like a blade through silk. "I can fly it." The revelation. The room erupted in the same scripted laughter Elena had heard before, but now she understood it differently. They weren't laughing at an incompetent maintenance worker. They were laughing at someone who had just volunteered to unknowingly destroy the evidence that could bring them all down. "Do you even know which end lifts off?" Tyler Kane asked, his question carrying the weight of his father's orders. But Elena's response shattered their carefully constructed world. "I know exactly what you're really transporting," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "Mobile evidence destruction units, not military equipment. I know about the forged maintenance records, the failed pilot certifications, the 3 deaths you've covered up, and I know that General Kane ordered the poisoning of those pilots to prevent them from discovering the truth." True, thick silence fell over the room. This wasn't the response. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Elena Rodriguez, Joint Command Special Investigations. I've been undercover here for 3 months, documenting your conspiracy to defraud the military and cover up pilot deaths. And in about 30 seconds, a joint command. Strike team is going to surround this facility." On cue, the sound of helicopters filled the air outside. The emergency lights took on a different meaning as armed personnel began moving through the corridors. Tyler Kane's face went white. "That's impossible. You're just what?" Elena asked, finally allowing her true authority to show. "Just someone you underestimated because of a gray uniform? Just someone you dismissed because you thought rank was more important than truth?" The base commander, his face now pale, with the realization of what was happening, took a step back. You're... I'm the pilot who's going to make sure those evidence files reach Joint Command intact, Elena said. And I'm the officer who's going to see that every person involved in this conspiracy faces justice. As if summoned by her words, armed investigators burst through the doors. Elena flashed her real credentials, not the fake maintenance ID she'd been using, but the gold badge of a Joint Command Special Investigator. Tyler Kane, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, she announced, her voice carrying the full weight of military authority. Your father's orders won't protect you anymore. The room filled with investigators as Elena's months of undercover work finally reached its climax. Every person she had identified, every conversation she had recorded, every piece of evidence she had gathered, it all came together in a symphony of justice that had been building since the moment she first stepped off that transport van. Justice served, the aftermath unfolded like a carefully choreographed operation, which, in many ways, it was. Elena had spent months not just gathering evidence, but coordinating with Joint Command to ensure that when the moment came, justice would be swift and complete. Tyler Kane stood in restraints, his father's influence finally powerless to protect him. The other conspirators, instructors, commanders, and cadets who had participated in the cover-up, were led away one by one. The academy that had seemed so untouchable just hours before was now the center of the military's largest corruption investigation in decades. Elena stood in the center of it all, no longer the invisible maintenance worker, but revealed as the decorated officer she had always been. The gray uniform that had marked her as an outsider now seemed like the armor it had always been, protection that had allowed her to get close enough to expose the truth. We misjudged everything, the former base commander said as investigators led him away. We never saw you coming. Elena's response was quiet but final. That was the point. As the investigation team processed the scene, Elena walked to the C-130 that had been central to the conspiracy's final phase. Instead of destroying evidence, it would now transport that evidence to Joint Command, where it would ensure that the 3 dead pilots finally received the justice they deserved. The other cadets, the ones who had mocked her, dismissed her, treated her as invisible, now watched in stunned silence as the truth of what had been happening around them became clear. Some had been complicit, others had simply been blind. All of them would have to live with the consequences. One young cadet, tears streaming down her face, approached Elena. The pilots who died, they were my friends. I never understood what really happened to them. Elena's expression softened for the first time in months. Now you do. And now you can make sure it never happens again. As the sun set over Iron Ridge Flight Academy, Elena packed the same gray uniform she had worn throughout her investigation. Tomorrow she would return to Joint Command in her proper uniform, with her proper rank, to testify about what she had discovered. But tonight, she stood on the tarmac one last time, thinking about the 3 pilots whose deaths had started this investigation. They had died because of corruption, because of greed, because people in positions of trust had valued money more than lives. Now finally their sacrifice had meaning. The conspiracy was exposed, the guilty would face justice, and the military aviation system would be reformed to prevent future tragedies. Elena walked away from Iron Ridge not with fanfare, but with the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed. Behind her, the academy would be rebuilt, not just its structures, but its values, its integrity, its commitment to the truth. Sometimes justice doesn't announce itself with speeches or ceremonies. Sometimes it just arrives, quietly and completely, carried by someone who refused to let the truth stay buried, and sometimes that's exactly what the world needs most. If you enjoyed this story of courage and justice, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. What did you think of Elena's incredible investigation?